On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael, Cole, and I are back together. We're going to try to preview whatever this basketball game against the Wizards is going to look like tonight. We're going to talk about lottery odds for the Grizzlies and the difference between 6th and 7th. But we're going to lead off with a hot take potential. Are the Memphis Grizzlies losing their space in the West to the Oklahoma City Thunder? It's a hot potato kind of Tuesday here on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's such a hot take. I'm over here bumbling and stumbling. It's been a while. So nice to be back here on Locked On Grizzlies. Yeah. I am your host for this episode, Ja Morant. Again, it's been a minute, and it's been a while since Damichael Cole has been by my side. Damichael's flown solo the last couple of episodes. I appreciate Damichael. You know, I got sick in my house, and then my kids got sick. It's been a crazy few days in the Mullinax household, but Damichael's been holding down the fort, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll all stay healthy and get through this week of Grizzlies basketball together here on Locked On Grizzlies. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are so happy to be on YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, literally anywhere you get shows. You can find Damichael and I here on Locked On Grizzlies. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Hopefully at this point you are an everydayer, which of course means that every time an episode of Locked On Grizzlies drops, you are with Damichael and myself. Damichael, again, thank you so much for holding down the fort while I've been out the last couple of days. I know you've been under the weather a little bit as well, but we're powering through. Unlike some people on the Memphis Grizzlies roster, and we'll talk about that injury report here momentarily. But unlike them, we're trying to fight through the things that ail us and continue to finish this season. But as I alluded to earlier in the show, Damichael, I'm coming in hot to start off this episode to bring my return.
And Joe, when you come in hot, it's not a normal hot. You're like the Cheetos guy with the flaming hot Cheetos. You come in hot.
I have some Chester Cheeto tendencies. I'm not thin like Chester Cheeto, but I do enjoy Cheetos like Chester Cheeto does. I talked about on Locked On Now, I believe it was on Sunday when the Grizzlies played the Thunder. And on our episode of Locked On Now, a YouTube short that I drop after every game that the Grizzlies play, you'll get another one tonight after the Wizards contest, whatever that's going to look like, and we'll talk more about that. I talked about how, for me, the takeaway from the Thunder beating this version of the Grizzlies wasn't that Oklahoma City won. They should win. They're currently one of the best teams in the NBA. The Thunder are the team that have benefited the most from the Memphis Grizzlies falling off this season. The key words there, hopefully being, Damichael, this season, right? We are operating under the assumption that the Memphis Grizzlies are going to ascend once again. But what if that doesn't happen? What if, not necessarily the window closing, I think most rational minds would agree that the Grizzlies are a top 6 team at the very least in the Western Conference when healthy. They're not a play-in team. They are a playoff team out West. So I'm not saying that they're going to, tumble out into the lottery and the window is closed. But what are the chances that the Thunder are not going to relinquish this spot? Because eventually the Grizzlies will be close to full strength, if not entirely full strength. That eventually these two teams will clash. And Memphis then, 2 years ago, is what the Thunder are now. They even do the fun interviews next to each other post-game where they're dancing and staring each other down.
My whole life is consistent.
Right. Yeah, they are literally doing their best Memphis Grizzlies circa 2022 impression. So my question for you, Damichael, as somebody who covers the Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, is their beat writer for that publication. You see them consistently, just about as much as anybody. Where are you at in that thought in my mind? Because I battle and go back and forth on it. On one hand, I know Memphis is more experienced. On the other hand, the Thunder have a hell of a lot of talent and a lot of assets at their disposal to add even more potentially. It's going to be a pretty impressive battle if we ever see it at full strength. Do you think that the Thunder have passed Memphis by permanently, or is it just for now?
The thing about the Thunder team is, you mentioned it, it's the assets. Like, they have the pieces, Shea Gilgeous, and the complementary players, like the Lou Dorts of the world, but the Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, they have those guys, but they have first-round picks on first-round picks. They just made a trade for Gordon Hayward just because they got the cap space to do so. But to answer the question, I'm going to pause a little bit on the idea that they've passed the Grizzlies, but I think it's a conversation. I do think it is a conversation because Shai Gilgeous is that guy now, right? He has that flavor that we remember 2022 Ja having. That was the year Ja won Most Improved, even though we were like, what, Most Improved? But, he won Most Improved because he was really that good. He improved a lot from the pretty good player that he already was. The Grizzlies won 56 games, tied the franchise record. Then it was the swagger, right? It was the, telling LeBron James, those footsteps don't scare nobody. It was the telling the New York Knicks, at Madison Square Garden, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant saying, we run up the chimney. We ain't ducking no smoke. It was the whole Golden State series. It was the comebacks against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Grizzlies established themselves, as they had a firm identity. I think, some people may say, well, why we're not talking about Minnesota, in the same light? Like it's OKC and the Grizzlies. It's because Minnesota, in my opinion, they're Anthony Edwards, but identity-wise, some things got to be figured out.
And there's also a difference in the money being spent, right?
Exactly.
Like the Thunder are going to be a second apron team. As you alluded to, Gordon Hayward, they acquired just because they could cap-wise. The Grizzlies are not anywhere near as financially invested as Minnesota is. I would argue, if not this year, next year, the Timberwolves have to be championship contenders to explain the amount of money that they're spending.
Exactly. So the case in point is it's OKC and Memphis world probably for the next few years in terms of two young teams in quote unquote smaller markets, that whole thing. But they both got a lot of assets. You got Ja Morant, you got Shai Gilgeous, you got Jalen Williams, you got Desmond Bane, you got Jaren Jackson Jr., you got Chet Holmgren. Like they line up side by side. Where OKC has an advantage right now is the assets. Where the Grizzlies have the advantage right now is experience. And because of that experience right now, I'm not ready to say, they've surpassed the Grizzlies just yet. I need to see them go up head-to-toe against the Grizzlies and beat up on them for that to be the case. Because guess what? We saw it in just 9 games. When Ja Morant played those 9 games, he was motivated. The Grizzlies were 6-3 in that stretch. You telling me Ja Morant's not going to come back with that same fire next year? You telling me Desmond Bane, after he's been high-fiving all these guys coming to the bench down 20 points, he's not going to come back with that fire? Jaren Jackson Jr., think he doesn't want to win playing through all these losses? Like, I'm not ready to say they've passed the Grizzlies. But like I did tell you, it is a conversation because there are similarities in how these teams were built up and the simple fact of the cultural aspect of it, the flavor that they play with, the off-court interviews that we mentioned, Shai Gilgeous, one of the best fashion guys in the league, Jaren Jackson Jr., one of the best fashion guys in the league, all these similarities. It is a conversation, but right now, they ain't past Memphis yet.
I need to see them compete similarly to Memphis in the playoffs before I actually entertain this. We can say that the Thunder are the 1 seed because technically I guess they are as of this recording. It's them in Minnesota at the top of the Western Conference. If I am a team that is at the bottom of the standings, if I'm the Los Angeles Lakers, if I'm the Phoenix Suns, if I'm somebody that's going to be a realistic 7 or 8 seed in these playoffs, do I fear the Thunder? Maybe you could argue by statistical analysis, the way that SGA is playing at an MVP
Would you pick
level,
the Lakers right now, Joe?
I would pick the Lakers in 6. I think that would be my prediction. Well, I just, again, it's very possible the Thunder come out and shellac them, and I go, oh, my God, the Grizzlies are in trouble. I need to see it first. I respect the skill of Chet Holmgren, but I just can't imagine a world where Anthony Davis doesn't eat him alive in the postseason, right? Like, it's just hard for me to envision AD not dominating that matchup.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to look at a Williams or an SGA and then look at LeBron James and what LeBron still is doing at 39 years old as a grown-ass man and not say, not that, 22, 23 isn't being grown, but you get my point, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing that people said about the Grizzlies a couple seasons ago. What are they going to do in the postseason? Well, Memphis won a playoff series. Memphis was competitive in the second round. I think that if they do something similar to what Memphis has already done, it's more of a conversation. I think the Grizzlies are kind of forgotten because of the small market aspect, Ja Morant and all the issues he's had, kind of souring a lot of the national media on him in particular as a face of the league. I do think there's a lot of redemption story arcs that could play out in the weeks and months and, potentially year ahead. And one of those things, stay tuned for a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. When these two teams face off and both teams are at full strength, it's going to be must-see TV. Right now, it's a 30-point win for Oklahoma City, and that's just the reality of the situation. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael and I are going to take a look at Tankathon once again. We're going to talk about lottery odds, the value of picking 6th over 7th in the lottery, and that sort of stuff. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. This season has been challenging for everybody that covers the Memphis Grizzlies, follows the Grizzlies as fans, whatever the case might be. And when you look at the injury list, as we're going to talk about later on in the show, it gets even more challenging. It can really make you have all sorts of feelings, even though it's a sport and it involves a team and things that don't seem as big as life itself. Sometimes we still need an opportunity to get things off our chest, whether they are big or small. Therapy can be helpful for everyone. It can also be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than what's going on with the Memphis Grizzlies, but it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while, regardless the size. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, talking Tankathon lottery odds. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Woo, it's nice to say that again. It's been too long. Hopefully you're enjoying the show so far. We've been talking Grizzlies Thunder, needing to see it from OKC before we really get too concerned about the Thunder passing Memphis by. But I thought it was an interesting conversation to have after watching that game on Sunday night. And now, after that loss, that puts Memphis firmly in the conversation, in the lottery. And we've talked about this a little bit before, partner. We've updated the lottery odds and that sort of thing. The Grizzlies currently slotted in the 6th spot. They are solidly there, right? The only team that's really going to maybe change is one spot up, one spot down. That's important to understand. The Grizzlies are not probably going to fall past 7, past the Thunder, or past the Raptors. And that pick is going to San Antonio more than likely. And they're also not going to probably go too far beyond Portland. Maybe Memphis really cools off. Portland goes on a winning streak somehow. Maybe Memphis moves up to 5. But there's not going to be much of a jump between those two positions. There's a major difference statistically, and Matt Hardlicka over on Patreon wrote about this. I highly recommend you subscribe to Matt's page if you don't already do so. There's a big difference in terms of the odds for getting into the top 4. Between picking at 6 or being in the lottery slot of 6 and being in the lottery slot of 7 with Toronto, right? There's a massive difference. And that difference is roughly, I'll leave it to Matt's article to go check out for the calculations. It's roughly a 13% difference in terms of getting in to the top 4 and having a shot at a top pick in this draft. And the way Matt explained it is if you had a 13% chance to improve your odds or if you had the ability to improve your odds by 13% at potentially winning the lottery and becoming a millionaire, would you do it? And Matt argued, yes. So what are we talking about in terms of Memphis trying to win these games? And in fairness to Matt, again, we'll talk about the injury list here later in the show. Maybe Memphis subscribes to Matt's Patreon and they're like, oh yeah, that's a great point. or maybe they just already agree with Hardlicka on this. Where do you stand with that lottery idea? I think the more honest response in this particular instance, it's back-to-back coming up tonight and tomorrow for the Grizzlies. They're not going to play, especially in this season. Jaren's not going to play back-to-backs the rest of the year. I think that's realistic to expect. Do you think that they are paying as much attention as some fans or writers like Matt are paying attention to these odds? They're a pretty analytical front office. They're pretty numbers-driven. They probably know that the odds are better. And whether you want to take a top talent in that top four, or if you're like Matt, and to be honest, myself, maybe you explore a trade using that asset. You obviously want the better shot at that pick being better as opposed to not being as good. But what is it worth to you?
Yeah, at the end of the day, no matter what you do with the pick, you want to have the optionality of having that pick be as valued as possible to have those options. If you want to go out and get a veteran player that's proven in the NBA, saying, hey, I have the number 4 pick is much better than saying I have the number 9 pick. There's a difference. But I do think that the difference, again, 7 to 6 to 5 is substantial, especially with the way that the draft is set up now. You kind of touched on it there, but a lot of people probably the Grizzlies haven't been down this far since the lottery odds changed. I think, Joe, that's right? They haven't.
Yeah.
Been,
they moved up in the Ja Morant draft in 2019, exactly. And they were 8th, I believe, when they were in the lottery for that.
Exactly. So now with the way that it's set up, the first pick, second pick, third pick, the odds are all similar. From what is it, around 14% for each of those selections. So right. There's no great advantage to being, the team projected to be number 1, 2, 3 when the draft lottery comes. So with that being said, I think, yes, it matters. When you talk about, Jaren Jackson Jr. not playing on the first night of back-to-back, second night of back-to-back, whatever the case may be, the Grizzlies, though, I mean, you're right. They're an analytical front office. They'll never admit it, probably publicly, for competitive reasons and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think this is what I've gathered myself. I feel like they have pretty much a general idea of which guys bring something to the table from the standpoint of, Vince Williams, we've seen enough. We got a good idea what he's going to be. G.G. Jackson, we got a good idea what he's going to be. The offseason is really going to unfold some other things around this team. But right now, Scottie Pippen Jr., I want to see a little bit more of him. Lamar Stevens, I want to see what he's capable of. But at the end of the day, that draft pick is the biggest asset that the Grizzlies currently have, in my opinion. So having a better draft spot is crucial than winning any regular season game going forward.
And you have to learn a lesson, at least in my opinion, Damichael. You have to learn a lesson from the Golden State Warriors going James Wiseman at the number 2 overall pick when they had their gap year. Now, you can make
the lesson I learned from that, Joe?
They should have picked. Go ahead.
The lesson that you should take from that as well, Joe, is best available over need. That's my lesson from it.
I might have walked into that one a little bit. That's fair. I'm sticking with my fee-fi faux fum agenda, although I did just bring up an example of that not necessarily working accidentally. But again, the Warriors should have traded that selection, is the point that I should have made. Maybe you argue they should have taken, LaMelo and had the pretty phenomenal, when you think about it, guard combination of Steph with him. But at the same time, the Warriors said they were title contenders. And instead of trying to have it both ways, have their cake and eat it too, build for the future while still contending for a championship, you're either trying to contend for a title or you're not, right? And we had that conversation recently. I think that's where the Grizzlies are at. If you think your title window is open, you don't worry about trying to extend it in 2028 and 2029. You think you can do it now, go get it now. And if they pick 4th or 3rd or 2nd, first is different. Okay. If Sarr is there at number 1 overall, I don't know that I would have the guts to trade that pick if Sarr is sitting there. Because again, he fulfills both things, right? You could easily argue he's the number 1 guy in this draft class, and he's 7'1", so he fulfills my fee-fi faux fum requirement. So
let me add something on him real quick.
Please, absolutely.
We'll get deeper into it on another episode, but I've been looking at some scouting reports on him, and I saw there was a comp recently. They compared him actually to Jaren Jackson Jr. And if you look at the strengths of his game based on, not even just that report, but a lot of reports basically talking about how he is, a modern day big man. And from the standpoint of, not really brute and forcefulness and things like that, but skilled, like a guard and things like that. And then you watch him, you see a lot of that too. And is that what the Grizzlies need? It's worth talking about eventually, Joe. The fact
we
that
will have that conversation.
If he's Jaren Jackson Jr. light,
he's also at least taller, maybe not bigger than Jaren, but he's got a couple of inches on him. For sure. I think, again, if the Grizzlies are picking at 7 or 6, sign me up for Donovan Clingan, man. And we'll continue to have that conversation, fee-fi fo fum till the draft. But at the same time, if you're exploring trading the pick, there's no denying being at number 4 or number 3 is better than being at number 7 or number 8. There's just no denying that. It's a better asset. And Memphis has set themselves up nicely to have lots of options regardless what happens. It'll be fascinating to watch that continue to play out. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to try to preview this basketball game. The Grizzlies injury report is like 10 or 11 guys deep. We're going to do our best. I think Tyus Jones is coming back. Maybe we'll focus on that here on Locked On Grizzlies. Talk about that instead. But first, I do want to remind everyone that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national sports covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. Think about the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives as well as great escapes. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are built right into a beautiful 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Maybe you want a full-size SUV instead. The 2024 Nissan Armada has a rugged 4x4 frame that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Whatever direction you go, the Nissan Rogue, the Armada, or maybe the Nissan Pathfinder, perhaps, you can go and find your next adventure via shopping nissanusa.com. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this show, trying to preview a basketball game between two of the worst teams in the NBA. If that doesn't make you want to stick around, I don't know what will. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, the king of bad lead-ins to ads. And I'm joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on X at Damichael C. Follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. Damichael, you've got a busy night ahead of you the next couple of nights. One of those home and home back-to-backs. And I don't envy you, partner. I'm going to be honest, okay? All we can be is honest with each other in our relationship. You have one of the coolest jobs there are. And when I lived in Memphis, I would have loved to do something similar to what you are currently doing, right? When I was building myself up as a blogger, podcaster, all those sorts of things, starting GBB Live and, trying to get that on the radio, all that stuff literally 10 years ago now. That's how old I am. I don't envy you tonight and tomorrow because you are going to be working late, working back-to-backs, covering two of the worst teams in the NBA, coming to FedEx Forum. Even in the current state of the Memphis Grizzlies, and I know you'll talk a little bit about the injury report here momentarily, they should win or at least be competitive against both the Wizards and the Hornets given the current state of things. But with that injury report, it's going to be a challenge. And then obviously the main storyline, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Tyus Jones making his return to FedEx Forum after a pretty solid career and time here in Memphis.
Yeah, before we get to the injury report, I'll talk about Tyus a little bit from the standpoint of one of my favorite players that I've gotten a chance to cover in my short tenure here, covering the Grizzlies from the standpoint of just he's a true professional. He was great for a young journalist, like myself. I feel like, being the beat writer, you have to be the one who's going to consistently, I mean, especially when I was traveling a little bit more, sometimes you're the only one on the trip and you got to ask the questions that people want the answers to. And sometimes that wasn't always easy. The Grizzlies, especially the last couple of years, they've been an emotional team. And I've talked about it here on times. There were, certain times where, Ja Morant wouldn't be happy after a loss and he'd say, I'm not talking today. And Dylan Brooks, with those Golden State games, right? And the Lakers games, he'd say, I'm not talking today. And Tyus Jones would just be over there. He'd be like, come over here. Like, I got it. And that was easy because Tyus Jones was a voice. And you could, trust the things that he said. And he always gave great answers from this. But he's a great family guy, great basketball player. He was great for Memphis in his time here. And he's continuing to do a lot of great things over there in Washington from what I've heard. The team is pretty bad overall. And, Tyus Jones' defense hasn't been good, which is really a surprise to us. But at the same time, go look at the assist to turnover ratio leaderboard, Joe. You know who's at the top. I don't even got to get into it. You know exactly who's at the top of that.
Well, and Tyus Jones needs a very specific type of two guard to play alongside. And I'm fairly confident that guy is not Jordan Poole.
It's not. It's not. And Jordan Poole, again, did you see the defensive net ratings with those groups?
It's not great.
When Jordan Poole, Tyus Jones, and Kyle Kuzma are on the floor together, like it's easy pickings. Like it's like grandma's house on Sunday. Like everybody gets to eat. Like it's easy pickings. But yeah, that's stuff for the Tyus Jones. But yeah, getting into again the injuries. So many guys are out right now, and you mentioned Jaren Jackson Jr. That's the big one. But, Vince Williams, that's another one. Then you got all the guys who we know, have been out over the long period of time. Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Ja Morant. The list goes on. But I think, 9 guys are currently listed as out. Then doubtful is Scottie Pippen Jr., who I just wrote about today, actually. So he, is getting close to being back. I would expect him. If he's not back on the second half of the back-to-back, he should be back Saturday, but probably going to be back on the second half of the back-to-back. So that's a boost. Like that's a guy that I want to see personally. But as of right now, tomorrow, look, enjoy the game, and we'll see who plays because there's 3 guys listed as questionable too.
It's pretty wild, right? And for the Wizards, right, Marvin Bagley's not playing. I'm most interested in seeing Bilal Coulibaly, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, or at least close to correctly.
Good job, Joe. Good job.
One of the younger players in the league, not as young as Gigi, one of the more inexperienced guys, Victor Wembanyama's former teammate there in France, if I remember correctly. He has a frame that theoretically Jordan Poole probably shouldn't play next to Tyus Jones. Coulibaly could, right? And I think that is somebody that is defensively oriented that can that true 3-and-D type of player. I think that makes Tyus, after watching him with the Wizards, because again, outside of the Grizzlies, for obvious reasons, the Wizards are the team that's closest to me. So I watch the most Wizards basketball, even though I have League Pass. I watch the most Wizards when I'm not watching the Grizzlies. From watching Tyus,
you had a painful basketball.
It's been a rough year.
Oh,
goodness gracious, you're not wrong.
Grizzlies and Wizards?
Well, I've watched almost every Grizzlies game, right? Like even if I don't see it live, I watch it, I record it because I'm still an ancient guy that has a cable connection. I think that for Tyus, he has to be in a kind of like how I make fun of John Conchar. He needs to be in a carefully curated situation where he maximizes that assist to turnover ratio. He's shooting the 3 ball really well. He's a little bit streaky this year, but he's doing a really strong job, Tyus is, of shooting the 3. I think that he has a role as a starter in the NBA, but he has to be on a team almost like the Boston Celtics. And obviously Derek White is there, Drew Holiday. That's not going to happen. But a team like that has so many stout perimeter defenders, maybe the Orlando Magic, to be honest, kind of makes sense long-term. For somebody like Tyus. I think the Magic would make a lot of sense for Tyus' skill set. And bringing that maturity that you mentioned earlier would be a big thing for the Magic. I'm curious to see how the Wizards compete with this version of the Grizzlies. It's going to look more like a G League game at times than it is going to look like an NBA game. But again, whether it's tonight against the Wizards, whether it's tomorrow against the Hornets, these are 2 games that even in their current state of play, the Grizzlies should compete. And if they don't compete, if they get blown out by the Wizards or the Hornets, and we'll talk more about that on tomorrow's show, whatever the case might be, it's cause for concern in terms of how the rest of the season is going to go. If you don't care about winning or losing because of those lottery odds we talked about earlier, cool. I want to see them be competitive because you're trying to figure out which of these guys are going to be a part of this Grizzlies roster when hopefully they're knocking the Thunder back down a peg here in about 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, and I'm big on culture, Joe. I know you are too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's important to me, and that's why from the jump you haven't seen me kind of allude to the words like tanking and things like that. Like at the end of the day, the players tanking shouldn't even be in their heads. That should be a front office thing.
Coaches too.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like Major League. That's I love that movie. You know, you like Major League and you see how in Major League the front office is trying to lose, but the players are trying to win. And you know, for those who haven't seen it, spoiler alert, they do. But to the Memphis Grizzlies today,
I'm impressed by that pool. I'm going to be honest with you, partner. That's beyond your years. I'm very proud of you.
No, thank you, Joe. You know, got a little wisdom here and there, but the thing about it that is, from a cultural standpoint, you don't want to build the wrong habits in certain guys who are going to be around here. You don't want G.G. Jackson next season going, oh, I had 27 today after the Grizzlies just lost against the Lakers on national TV and dropped from the 2 seed to the 5th seed. And you don't want, Vince Williams saying, oh, I almost had a triple-double. I'm still trying to – because, you know, right now, like, it's okay. But you still want to keep that hunger. Like, we were talking to Jake LaRavia the other day, and I know he wasn't here for the 56-win season, but he was on the team that won 51 games last season. And Jake LaRavia was asked after the game, like, oh, the defense, you know, you held them under 100 points on one of the recent losses. And they talked about him having a good night. I think he had a double-double in the game. And he was like, we lost. Like, yeah, sure, defense, cool, whatever, but we lost. And you have to keep that mentality. That is important to me. This game against the Wizards, the game against the Hornets after that, and throughout the rest of the season. And that's something maybe we talk about a little bit deeper going forward because that's habits. You want to keep that hunger because the guys who have it, Marcus Smarts of the world, someone who's never missed the playoffs in his career, Ja Morant, I mean, it probably feels like he hasn't missed the playoffs in his career with the way it's gone. You know, that's where these guys have to be. It's a cultural thing that I'm more focused on going forward.
You could say that Ja Morant has never missed the postseason in his
There we go.
Because they did make the play-in in the bubble, right? And that technically, that first play-in game was a postseason game. It was an extra game between them and the Blazers. So I think that there's something to this idea that the winning has been the expectation in Memphis. Obviously, this year being that gap year, as we've decided to call it. What comes next? We can't get too far ahead of ourselves because there's still a month or so of the season. But what comes next, right? That's what everybody wants to know and wants to see, and that'll continue to be a focus of our conversation here on Locked On Grizzlies. The next time we are on these Locked On Grizzlies podcast waves, I'll be flying solo after the Grizzlies game against the Wizards. We'll break down that contest as best we can. I'll take a look to the next game against the Hornets, talking all the ins and outs, actual basketball to talk about. We got to take advantage of that while we can, partner, because, you know, in 6 weeks when the season's over, you and I are going to be talking, what do we talk about today, right? Like, we're going to be working through those things here on Locked On Grizzlies. So lots of basketball to discuss on our next episode, and I'm excited for that. And I'm excited to follow all of Damichael's coverage at the Commercial Appeal of the next couple of games. Again, Damichael's going to be doing his beat writer thing, so you'll have me solo the next couple of episodes of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you 1,000 times for making us a part of your NBA content consumption each and every time an episode drops. Hopefully you're an everydayer by now, being a part of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast family. YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're checking us out here, there, and everywhere. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. Remember that we now have Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also on the free channels app portion of Amazon Fire TV. I'm a huge fan of everything that Locked On continues to do. We're building the network over and over and over again as 2024 grinds along, and Damichael and I are proud pieces of that process. For my partner, Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. We will catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. Enjoy the basketball as much as you can, because like we were talking about earlier, before you know it, it'll be gone and you'll miss these Grizzlies. Catch you next time.